History often celebrates Rome's victories through steel, strategy, and soldiers. But here lies the myth. Empires are not only won with swords. Rome's true power marched not in legions but in grain ships, bread rations, and the steady flow of food that kept armies and citizens alive. Without supply, Rome's conquests would have starved before they began. Today we uncover how Rome's food supply, silent, unseen, but unstoppable, won its greatest battles. Rome's rise from a small city-state to a dominating republic, and eventually a vast empire, did not rest on soldiers alone. It rested on the ability to keep those soldiers and the people at home fed. In the earliest days of the Republic, the land of central Italy was fertile enough to sustain the population. Small farms tilled by citizen families produced the grain, olives, and wine that filled Roman tables. But as the population grew and as Rome waged longer and more frequent wars, the demand for food quickly outpaced local supply. Soldiers in the field required dependable rations, and citizens at home required reassurance that their lives would not collapse under the weight of shortages. Without secure food production, no military campaign or political order could last. This realization shaped the policies of Rome for centuries to come. By the 3rd century BC, after Rome's victories in the Punic Wars, it became clear that Italy alone could no longer sustain the ever-growing needs of the city. Rome's conquests were not just about land or glory, they were about resources and food above all. Sicily was among the first provinces turned into a Roman breadbasket, its fertile fields producing immense quantities of grain. Sardinia and Corsica followed, their harvests redirected to Rome's markets. These territories were not annexed merely for expansion, they were secured to fill Roman granaries. By controlling the agricultural heartlands of the Mediterranean, Rome ensured that its population would never fall prey to hunger, and its armies could march with confidence. As the empire expanded, the link between food and power only grew stronger. The provinces were expected to provide more than taxes. They were expected to provide stability through harvests. North Africa, rich in farmland, soon joined the network, sending endless shipments of wheat across the sea. Each province taken was assessed not only for its strategic value but for its ability to feed Rome. This was no accident. Roman leaders understood that supply dictated survival. Grain became a weapon and a tool of governance. Those who controlled the granaries controlled the pulse of the empire. The importance of food supply also reshaped Roman society. Wealthy elites, once warriors and statesmen, began investing heavily in farmland, especially large estates known as latifundia. These estates often relied on slave labor and produced grain on a massive scale, destined not for local tables, but for the needs of the capital and the legions abroad. The ordinary farmer, once the backbone of the Republic, struggled to compete, but the system ensured Rome had food flowing in abundance. In turn, this agricultural shift strengthened the empire's reliance on foreign provinces, tightening the bond between conquest and consumption. By the late Republic, Rome's survival was bound to the steady stream of imported grain. Shortages led to riots, unrest, and political upheaval. Leaders learned quickly that securing food supply was as vital as securing loyalty. Thus, feeding the Republic and later the Empire was never a background matter. It was the very core of Rome's rise, the silent but decisive element that turned victories on the battlefield into lasting dominion. Rome was not just built on military might, it was built on the promise that no Roman would starve. By the late Republic, Rome had grown into a city of hundreds of thousands, a scale that demanded constant and reliable food. Feeding such a mass was not only a question of survival but also of politics. Out of this reality emerged the grain dole, a system by which the state distributed free or heavily subsidized grain to its citizens. At first it was a limited measure, intended to support only the poorest households, but as Rome's population grew and unrest flared, the grain dole became an institution. No longer was it a matter of charity, it was a tool of control. Politicians quickly understood that securing grain meant securing votes, loyalty, and the stability of their rule. Julius Caesar recognized the power of food distribution as clearly as he recognized the power of legions. Before his reforms, the system was chaotic, often corrupted by profiteers and mismanagement. Caesar cut the number of recipients, but he also expanded the regularity and organization of the dole. He made sure it was no longer a haphazard promise but a reliable flow of grain into Roman households. By doing so, he bound a large part of the urban population directly to his leadership. Hunger was silenced and loyalty was reinforced not by words but by bread. After Caesar, Augustus understood the importance of the grain dole even more deeply. He knew that emperors could be overthrown if the people of Rome went hungry. To prevent such a crisis, he developed a highly organized system of supply. Grain was purchased, stored, and distributed under the oversight of imperial officials. Great warehouses were built, massive granaries capable of storing food for months, even years. Augustus created the office of the Praefectus Annonae, a high-ranking official dedicated entirely to the management of Rome's food supply. This was no minor detail in administration. It was a central pillar of the empire's survival. The grain dole also had symbolic value. For the ordinary Roman citizen, it was proof that the empire cared for their lives, that they were not abandoned to poverty or famine. It gave them a sense of belonging and security. For the emperors, it was a shield against unrest. As long as bread was available, the people were less likely to rebel no matter how harsh the laws or heavy the taxes. Roman writers often remarked that the populace cared for bread and games, but behind this phrase lay the very real truth, that bread kept the city from tearing itself apart. The grain dole shows how deeply food and politics were intertwined. It was not generosity, it was governance. Leaders who failed to maintain it risked chaos, while those who secured it could rule with confidence. The system ensured that the empire's heart, the city of Rome, remained calm, even as wars raged on distant frontiers. Food was not simply nourishment. In Rome, it was power, stability, and the silent bond between ruler and ruled. The lifeline of Rome did not run along its roads or its aqueducts. It stretched across the sea. The Mediterranean was more than a body of water. It was the empire's artery, pumping food from distant provinces into the heart of the city. As Rome's population expanded beyond what Italian farmlands could sustain, this maritime network became essential. Vast fleets of merchant vessels, some capable of carrying hundreds of tons of grain, crisscrossed the waters each year. These ships, often sailing from North Africa, Sicily, or above all Egypt, carried the harvests that fed millions. Without them, Rome would grind to a halt. A failed voyage was not simply an inconvenience, it threatened famine and unrest. The state understood the dangers well. Pirate raids in the late Republic exposed Rome's vulnerability. Grain ships were easy prey, slow and heavy with cargo. When supply was cut, panic erupted in the capital. Prices soared, riots broke out, and the very order of the city wavered. To secure its food, Rome launched powerful campaigns to sweep the seas clear of piracy. Pompey the Great was famously given extraordinary command to rid the Mediterranean of pirates, a task he accomplished with brutal speed. His victory was not celebrated merely as a triumph of arms, it was a triumph of bread. With sea routes safe, the city could once again eat in peace. But safety at sea was never permanent. Storms could delay shipments for weeks, and poor harvests in a single province could ripple into crisis. To prevent disaster, the emperors invested heavily in naval protection. Escort ships guarded the slow-moving merchant fleets, while lighthouses and harbors were expanded to ease navigation. The empire's logistics were as much a military operation as any battlefront. Every voyage was a campaign against time, weather, and threat. The importance of these shipments can hardly be overstated. When grain fleets arrived in Ostia, Rome's harbor at the mouth of the Tiber, the city erupted in activity. Workers unloaded sacks and amphorae, carted them to massive granaries, and ensured distribution to markets and the grain dole. Citizens understood the significance of these arrivals. A fleet in port meant stability, food on the table, and calm in the streets. A delay meant whispers of hunger and fear. For the emperors, ensuring the steady arrival of grain fleets was as critical as commanding legions. Thus, the Mediterranean became more than a highway of conquest. It was a floating granary. Rome's power depended not only on controlling land, but on controlling the sea. Whoever threatened those waters threatened the empire itself. The navy was not simply a weapon of expansion, but the shield of survival. Rome's greatness marched on land, but it floated on the waves of the Mediterranean, carried in the holds of grain ships that silently determined the fate of the empire. Rome's commanders understood a truth that many of their enemies ignored. No army, no matter how brave or disciplined, can fight on an empty stomach. Food was the fuel of conquest, and Rome treated it as carefully as it treated swords and shields. Campaign after campaign showed that logistics, how to feed, supply, and move men, decided the outcome of wars. Roman generals were not only strategists of battlefields, they were architects of supply lines. Every march, every siege, every extended campaign rested on the ability to secure grain, oil, and wine for thousands of soldiers and animals. The Roman army functioned like a moving city. Each legionary carried basic rations, but no army could live off its own packs for long. Generals organized wagon trains, herds of livestock, and riverboats to deliver steady supplies. When possible, they used local resources, building fortified depots and tapping into nearby harvests. But Rome did not rely only on luck or plunder. They built roads to connect supply routes, dug storage pits, and stationed guards to protect provisions. Armies could march farther and fight longer, because Rome had perfected the art of feeding them. The contrast with Rome's enemies is striking. Hannibal, perhaps the greatest military genius of his age, invaded Italy with daring speed, crushing Roman armies at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. Yet his brilliance could not overcome one fatal weakness: lack of secure supply. His men and animals weakened, and as months turned to years, his campaign withered. Rome, though bloodied, endured. Its logistical machine replaced losses, kept its armies supplied, and slowly strangled Hannibal's position. In the end, his victories mattered less than Rome's ability to outlast him through organization and food. Sieges revealed another face of Rome's mastery of supply. To encircle a city could take months or years, and it was not the walls that usually broke first, but the bellies of those trapped inside. Rome starved enemies into surrender, while keeping its own troops fed through carefully planned networks of supply depots and foraging patrols. During Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, he repeatedly cut enemy supply lines, forcing opponents into desperation before a decisive clash. His genius was not only tactical brilliance, it was understanding that hunger could defeat a foe faster than steel. For Roman commanders, food was a weapon as much as the gladius. They learned to deny supplies to their enemies, burning crops, blocking routes, and capturing storehouses. They learned to move faster and farther, because their supply chains were stable. The army's discipline extended to rationing, ensuring that even in hard times, soldiers were better provisioned than their foes. This advantage created confidence, and confidence created victories. Rome's greatness in war was not just the courage of its legions, but the unseen lifelines that fed them. By making supply a priority, Rome turned campaigns of chance into wars of endurance. Enemies fought battles. Rome fought wars of survival, and in that contest, food proved as sharp as any sword. When Augustus seized Egypt in 30 BC, the conquest reshaped the fate of the empire. This was not simply the end of Cleopatra's kingdom. It was the securing of Rome's most vital food source. The Nile's yearly floods deposited rich silt across its valley, creating some of the most fertile farmland in the ancient world. For centuries, Egypt had been known as the granary of the Mediterranean, capable of producing surpluses far beyond its own needs. With Egypt under Roman control, those surpluses now flowed northward, directly into the heart of the empire. It is no exaggeration to say that Rome's survival, and the calm of its vast population, came to depend on the harvests of the Nile. Each year, fleets of massive grain ships departed from Alexandria, loaded with thousands of tons of wheat bound for Rome. These shipments were so large and so regular that they became the backbone of the city's food supply. Ancient sources suggest that as much as 1/3 of Rome's grain came from Egypt. This single province fed not only ordinary citizens through the grain dole, but also soldiers stationed along the empire's frontiers. Without Egyptian wheat, the streets of Rome would have turned restless, the poor would have rioted, and the legions might have faltered in distant campaigns. Thus Augustus and his successors guarded Egypt with extraordinary care. No senator was allowed to govern Egypt, and no powerful Roman was permitted to set foot there without imperial permission. The province was ruled directly by a prefect chosen by the emperor, usually a man of the equestrian order who posed no political threat. This extraordinary arrangement reveals how critical Egypt was considered. It was not a land to be entrusted to ambitious generals or rival elites. Control of Egypt meant control of Rome itself, and Augustus intended to keep that control firmly in imperial hands. The importance of Egypt also influenced Rome's naval priorities. The routes from Alexandria to Ostia were heavily protected, with escort fleets ensuring that storms, pirates, or hostile powers could not easily disrupt the flow of grain. Any threat to these shipments was treated as a threat to the empire's survival. In times of crisis, emperors personally oversaw measures to secure the Egyptian harvest and reassure the people of Rome that bread would not fail them. Egypt's role as the empire's breadbasket gave it a unique position in Roman politics and strategy. Unlike other provinces whose taxes filled treasuries or whose soldiers filled ranks, Egypt filled stomachs. Its harvests were the quiet foundation of imperial stability. Emperors rose and fell. Battles were won and lost, but as long as the Nile continued to flood and the grain ships continued to sail, Rome endured. The conquest of Egypt was more than a victory of arms. It was the securing of the empire's lifeline. In truth, whoever commanded Egypt held not just a province, but the key to Rome's survival. Beneath the grandeur of Rome's armies and monuments lay an immense, carefully managed system of food logistics that kept the empire alive. This system was invisible in the sense that it rarely appeared in the triumphal arches or heroic tales. Yet it was as essential as any legion or general. Feeding millions of people in the capital and supplying countless soldiers across provinces required organization on a scale the ancient world had rarely seen. Rome built it piece by piece until it became the hidden machinery of empire. At the heart of this system were the granaries and warehouses. In Rome itself, colossal storehouses such as the Horia Galbae could hold grain reserves to feed the city for months. These facilities were not simple barns, but carefully engineered structures designed to protect food from moisture, pests, and decay. Grain was measured, recorded, and guarded with the precision of treasure. From these reserves, officials managed the distribution to bakeries, markets, and the grain dole. The movement of food was not left to chance. It was mapped and enforced through strict oversight. The officials responsible formed a specialized branch of the state. The Praefectus Annonae, first established under Augustus, held authority over the city's food supply. His duties included overseeing shipments from provinces, monitoring stockpiles, and preventing fraud or hoarding. Subordinates tracked harvests, coordinated transport, and ensured that supplies flowed smoothly into Rome's harbor at Ostia and along the Tiber River into the city. The precision of this system gave emperors confidence that the capital, no matter how large, could remain stable even when distant provinces faced turmoil. But Rome's logistical network stretched far beyond the city. Provinces were integrated into an imperial supply chain, each assessed for its ability to contribute grain, oil, wine, or other staples. Roads were not built merely for legions. They carried wagons filled with food toward depots and frontier camps. River routes and canals supplemented sea transport, ensuring that supplies could move swiftly even inland. Every military outpost relied on this system, and every campaign drew strength from its reliability. The invisible machine also depended on countless laborers, farmers in the provinces, dock workers at ports, sailors steering grain ships, mule drivers hauling carts, and clerks keeping records. These men and women rarely appeared in Rome's triumphal processions, yet their work sustained the empire more than any single victory. Their effort created continuity, a steady rhythm of harvest and transport that allowed Rome to concentrate on expansion, governance, and spectacle. The state treated food as a matter of security. Hoarding was punished severely, price manipulation was restricted, and during crises, the emperor himself was expected to intervene. A hungry populace meant riots. A well-fed populace meant loyalty. Thus, Rome's logistics were not only practical but political, binding the people to their rulers. What made Rome endure was not only its legions or its laws, but this vast and disciplined network of supply. It was the hidden strength, the silent scaffolding on which the empire stood. Behind every march of soldiers and every crowd in the forum lay the quiet assurance that bread would be there tomorrow. Rome's victories were written not only in battles and conquests, but in the quiet, constant flow of food that sustained its people and legions. Grain fleets across the Mediterranean, the Nile's rich harvests, the grain dole in the city, and the vast web of logistics together formed the backbone of empire. What seemed ordinary, bread on a table, rations for a soldier, was in truth the difference between survival and collapse. Rome teaches that no power endures on force alone. It endures when it masters the unseen foundations of life. The empire's true strength was not just in swords or laws, but in its ability to keep hunger at bay, turning food into the greatest weapon of all.